Edward Miskie. Welcome to the Bookaholic Podcast.
Thank you, Deirdre. It's lovely to be here.
Yes, yes, yes. It's lovely to be here in more ways than one because you're the sole survivor of a rare cancer for the last 10 years. Yay, hooray, thank
Yay.
goodness. So, yeah, it's definitely good to be here and you have probably a lot more to say about being here than a whole lot of other people. And we're going to dive into your story because you've written a memoir that's like cancer slash musical theater slash those words should never go together, but they do. But they do in the title of your book. And tell us the title of your book.
Cancer, musical theater, and other chronic illnesses.
Yes, 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 yes. And so you read that and you're like, well, wow, how do I take that? Because again, cancer and musical theater rarely go together. But I think once we complete this interview, people will see what exactly you mean by that. And I think this is definitely going to be a great book for anyone who is going through, especially cancer, but very trying times as well. So, and I know you and I, we have had some great times on our getting to know you call, some fun times, but we are talking about cancer and we want to start from that and on a serious note, an informative note, and then we'll get to the other aspects of the creativity of this book and its concept. So before you had cancer, describe your life before you received this diagnosis.
I was a star, baby.
Oh,
No, I mean not to that degree, but I was very fortunate. I was able to perform in musicals all over the country. I had some momentum going in my career. I was young, I was hot, I had all the possibilities going. At the time, right before I was diagnosed, I was doing Hairspray in Nevada.
oh, yeah,
As Corny Collins, made famous by James Marsden in the musical
yeah.
movie adaptation recently, and it was fun. We were having a good time, and we were in the middle of the desert with like casinos, and we were gambling and drinking and just living that life.
Right, yeah, you were throwing it up.
Right, like any money we got went right back into the slot machines.
Wow, wow,
It
wow.
was
Well,
fun.
you
It
were
was fun.
young. You were
Yeah, I
young,
was
you were young.
exactly. I was 24 and we were just like soaking up the sun and like going up to like Tahoe on the days off, and I was living my best life, and that's
You
kind of one of the fortunate things that you get to do as an actor, like performing around the country. Like it's
right.
it's kind of funny. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to move to New York to do theater and be an actor, and then you end up working everywhere but New York for the most part. And
Wow.
it's not a bad thing. It's just you get to kind of like live this kind of vagabond lifestyle where you're
Yeah,
going from town to town to town doing different shows and various like of various sizes and budgets and whatnot.
yes.
And the fun part about it is that you get to be a tourist in every town that you're in.
Yeah,
So that's kind
yeah,
of what we were doing. That was my life before of
yeah.
just being a tourist wherever I went and making friends and kind of being silly and you know singing for my supper.
Yeah, well, it was the lifestyle of a young person, a young person that was fortunate enough to have such a position. And hey, you like you said, you were just living your life, living your best life, definitely. And so now you're living this great life, and then what happens? Do you feel some type of pain or unease or
Yeah, so I was between shows actually. I just finished doing Hairspray in Ohio, and then I was
Mhm.
about to start doing Hairspray in Reno, and I was laying out in my parents' backyard, soaking up the sun because,
Mhm.
24 without a care in the world of skin anything.
Right.
And I don't even think I was using sunscreen.
So probably not.
Yeah, probably not. You know how it is. And like I went to shower afterwards and I felt this little lump under my arm, and that was kind of the
Mm,
beginning of it. Like not knowing what it was small. It just felt like an interruption in like my skin. And
mhm.
I asked my mom about it, and I asked my best friend's mom about it because she's also both work in medicine, and
Oh, right.
They just were like, well, I mean, swollen lymph nodes can mean a bunch of things. It's probably something small and no big deal that doesn't feel too bad. So just wait and see what happens. And
Mhm.
it ended up just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Ugh.
And so I was misdiagnosed by my GP in New York as having cat scratch fever, which isn't real. And yeah, I know. They put me on antibiotics and I went on my merry way to Nevada. And while I was
Right.
there, it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until
Ugh.
by the time I left, it was a 5-month contract. By the time I left at the end of November, it was like the size of a grapefruit under my arm, and like my skin was all stretched out, and like my shoulder was like displaced back to make room for it, and like they had to take my costume out because it got so big. It was terrible. So by the time I got back to New York, it was very apparent that something needed to happen.
Yes, and now let me make this statement. A lot of times we may have things going on with us, and here you are in musical theater. So I'm thinking there's a lot of movement there. There's singing, there's dancing, there's, all of these things. And you're squelching your life down with this thing under your arm. And it's there, it's obtrusive, but you're living with it. And, I'm just saying, people stop making excuses for stuff that's just not right. It's not right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and that's kind of one of the things that I look back now, and the chronology of everything is like, it is what it is. I can't change it. But like, really,
Mhm,
what should have happened is I should have pushed harder for a diagnosis. But because I had
mhm.
this show coming up and I had this career momentum, I didn't want to disappear because I
Yeah,
knew that whatever it was, like, would have taken something away from me. Time
yeah,
being the most important. So I
yeah.
just kind of let it go. And if we would have waited any longer, I was at stage 1B, which is like a
Okay.
little hair away from stage 2,
Mhm.
which would have been a very different conversation. And I didn't find out until later, and I don't think they officially said this, but when we got further along in treatment and whatnot, they had found places that they suspected it had also been growing,
Ah!
that we were not aware of. Like, we knew that it had kind of spread up to under my clavicle. It was under my arm, and then it was under my clavicle, and then later we found out that there might have been some on my spleen because
Oh
my
my goodness.
spleen had shrunk. So, like,
Oh my
and this was
gosh.
all like, surprise, like, maybe that happened. So we don't
Right.
really know if it was officially stage 2 or not. It was never like written down as such, but there was definitely like a spreading of that happening that we were unaware of.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so what is this? I'm sure it's a long, horrible name, but what is this rare cancer called?
Get ready.
Oh gosh, I knew it was gonna be long and terrible.
Yeah, it's called rare enlarged diffuse B cell, Burkitt's like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
So it was part of that whole non-Hodgkin's, which
Yes.
that's confusing to people when it says non-Hodgkin's. People are like, well, what is that, not serious or whatever? And it's definitely
Well, so
serious.
the difference, to my understanding, the difference of the two is that Hodgkin's tends to be more of a chronic thing that you have to receive treatment for periodically for the rest of your life. I'm not
Okay.
sure if there are cases where that is not the case. That is, I believe that is how that was explained to me. Whereas
Okay.
lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, we have more information on and we have more studies on, and there's more treatment for it, and it's easier to treat. What made this weird is that it was a diffused B cell, which I don't know what that means. And then
Mhm.
there was the Burkitt's like component, which Burkitt's is a very serious, very aggressive kind of cancer, separate of non-Hodgkin's, that is found in children under the age of like 10 in certain
Mhm.
parts of Africa. And
Oh,
there's
wow.
even fewer cases of that reported throughout the world. And so the fact that me, as a 25-year-old white man in
Right.
America, having
Right.
anything to do with that was very strange. Um,
Yeah.
so it was just like this amalgamation of like, why is this here?
Right.
Um, but we like, like you said before, like, cancer is a very serious subject, and it was a very traumatic period of time in my life. But and something that I try to hit the point home as much as I can is that during this experience, we made fun.
Right.
We created memories so that I can look
Right.
back now and be like, that was so great. I'm so glad we did
Right.
that.
Right, 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 exactly. And just one more quick thing, and this just came upon you. This is not hereditary. This is not, this strangely came upon you. Like you said, it was a just unexplainable why you even got it.
Yeah, I mean, there's barely any real, like, chronic traces of cancer in our family that we know of, at least. I mean, there have been people in our family who have had types of cancer,
Mhm.
that and they're all different kinds. So there's no
Right.
through line of like, oh, this side of the family has breast cancer history. We don't
Right.
have that. We don't have that. So it was just a very weird, like, okay, here we go.
Right, right, right. So here we have to say to ourselves, you've got to accept something that's rare, and you don't have time or the room to say why me, which I'm sure that crossed your mind, but you don't really have that kind of time. So we're going to pause right here and go over to, as you were going through your treatments and doctor's appointments and all of this. Assuming you had support, but then you find out a lot of different things about people. And I will make this statement. Somebody once told me, you never know who you're really married to until you get a divorce. And I was like, oh, wow, because people start to they flip out, they act crazy. Then there's always the one I found out, and that a lot of brides or brides to be know what I'm talking about, is that you find out who your true friends are when you have a wedding, and the girl that you have always been friends with, and she's, you want her in your wedding, she's the one that's going to disappoint you. So, we all have found out, or there's different ways that we really find out about people, who your real friends are, who support you, who are fair weather friends versus loyal friends. And tell us a little bit about your experience with this kind of train of thought.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's so true. And I love the idea of like, you don't know who you're married to until you get a divorce. Like, what a great, because it's true. I mean, like
It's
once
true.
the pretense goes away, then like everyone becomes this like kind of survival mode, like feral animal that's like, "Arr, this
Yes.
is what's happening."
Yeah.
You take away the stability of it all, and like, it's kind of like I think it's a similar adage where you know who the kind of person that you are when you are faced with an emergency or something like that.
Right.
And it's kind of all the same idea as like when there's a giant upset in your life, the people who are there for you are there for you. And
Yes.
one of the people who I considered to be one of my closest friends at the time, like, I told him I had cancer, and that was the last time I saw them. um
Oh my gosh.
Save of one other time where they tried to be like, you're gonna have to talk to me eventually, and I just flat looked at them and said, no, I'm not.
Unreal. So
Because it's just, and like and I had a boyfriend break up with me during this period of time as well, and like it
yes.
took me a really long time to kind of come to peace with that, because it's like, oh, this guy's like a total asshole, and like, rah, 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 and
Right.
you go down that line of thinking.
Right. Right.
And rightfully so. That's a bad thing to happen. And
Right.
it hurts, and it doesn't feel good. It makes you question a lot about yourself, especially during a very rocky period of time that is also unstable.
Yeah.
But looking back, like, I see those people now, and it's just like, they're, first of all, they didn't fit in my life to begin with.
Right.
And secondly, they weren't equipped to be in my life.
Right.
And those are the people who were equipped to be in my life are the ones who stuck around and are still in my life and
Exactly.
have always been my friends. And I think
Exactly.
one of the best things, I've said this before, and it's kind of quasi controversial, where cancer is actually the best thing that ever happened to me for
Yeah.
a multitude of reasons, and this is one of them, where I know who my friends are, and
Yes.
I can say that definitively. Even as it is in the rear view of my life, I still definitively have the same passengers in my car.
Yes, yes, I love that. Well, and I just spoke to my husband and the other day about this similar thing, but not with a disease, and that you do find out just in general who your friends are, and there's friends. And if I could have told my younger self this, and I'm trying to tell younger people as much information as I possibly can, that you're going to have friends for a season. You don't know who that is right now, but there's just going to be some people that are friends, and you're going to love them, like them. Y'all going to have a great time, but they're going to only be in your life for a season. And you have to be good with that. and I think that's one of the things that people fail to tell young people. So I'm trying to tell them the the most information to prepare them as possible, because that's what happens. And anybody that doesn't have the sympathy enough, if you tell them that you have cancer, to not even want to check on you, I mean, that goes to show you who they are. That's, you definitely,
Mhm.
like, that's not going to be willing to check up on you and hope that you get better.
Well, and I think one thing that a lot of people that don't see it this way. I grew up playing sports. I by no means am like a sports person. I don't watch them now, but like as a kid and as a teenager, I was an athlete.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I got out of that and doing shows and musicals at the same time was the embodiment and the understanding of teamwork and how it works to not be a singularity,
Yeah.
and how life is really just a team sport. We're all in it together and we all need to help each other to get to the
Yeah.
end goal. And
Yeah.
that's not every human that you meet, but you get to select your team players and you get to
Right.
select the teams that you're on. And
Yes.
some people are quarterbacks and some people are tackles and some people are
Right.
coaches, and like that's
Yes.
just the dynamics. And I'm not a sports person, but
Right.
having had that experience as a teenager and understanding the dynamic of how people as a group work
Right.
to help you build your life while also building theirs. It's the same
Right.
with the show. You have someone who's the lead, you have someone who's the supporting, you have some people who are in the ensemble, and then you
Right.
have the tons of stage crew and stage management and the writers and producers, and this huge team to make
Right.
this one thing happen. And the one thing that's happening is your life. And there are little microcosms of other things that are happening within life. But, building your team and building the team that you want to be on is
Mhm.
so important. And like you said, like
Mhm.
people are around for a season. Well, sports are in seasons. And
Right.
and so it's kind of like, you get to pick who your ride or dies are,
Right.
and then the rest of them, like, it's not to say that they're not good people or they're not good friends, but like,
Right.
they wax and wane a little bit more than your core people.
That's
And like
exactly right.
and it really just is. I look at it as either a team sport or like building life as a musical, build a musical together.
Yes, 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 yes. Well, now let's move on to, here's another phrase that doesn't go together typically, but sex, drugs, and cancer. So how do these work? How do these three things work
How do
together?
they not work is the better question.
Oh no. Oh, gosh. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
let's hear it.
So, I mean, like, the first thing you hear when you're like cancer patient is not sex, drugs, or really anything else. And the
Right.
point I was trying to drive home with this particular narrative in the book is that like you're still a person, like you still want to be told that you're beautiful or that you're desirable, and like whether you're I'm not necessarily talking about like sex drive and desires per se, although that does play into it, but it's more
Mhm.
so the idea that like, I was a very good looking 23-year-old, and I didn't
That's
realize it
still
at the
very
time.
handsome now.
Looking back, well,
Still
thank
very
you, thank
handsome
you.
now.
I'll send you a picture otherwise, and you'll see the difference. And you'll be like, "Oh, wow, you've fallen down."
Oh,
Right on your face. But like, and you, of course, when you're that age, you don't think so, and you think everything is awkward and terrible, and you look like a dinosaur, and there's all kinds of mental body dysmorphia things that play into that, which I also talk about in the book. That's the other chronic illnesses part. But you go from being a person, however you look, however you feel about yourself, etc., to being this thing that kind of looks like it crawled out of a lagoon somewhere. And
Mhm.
I very much felt that way, but I still had this want to be like told that I was pretty or told that I was desirable, or like have someone catcall me on the street, as controversial as that is. I still, like, during that period of time, like wished that some construction worker would have been like, "Hey baby,"
Yes, yes,
because like I
yes.
just felt like, God, I would have given anything for that. And there's a scenario that I give in the book, and I will try to keep this as family friendly as possible.
Yeah.
But but like there's a scenario in the book where I go for my radiation appointment.
Mhm.
I went every day, 5 days a week for a month.
Mm.
And in the first like week or two that I was there, I was talking to the radio techs and radiology techs, and they were
Mhm.
like, yeah, so like before this happened, like, what did you do? And I was like, oh, I was an actor and whatever. And I pulled out my cell phone and I showed them my old headshot from like right before I started.
Right.
And both of them were like, that's you. And I just was like,
Oh my gosh.
and so, that really, really, really messed me up. And so
Yeah,
I got dressed after the appointment. I went home and I just like re-downloaded all of the dating apps that were available. And I just started like inviting guys over, like
right.
in
Yeah,
succession of each other, because like, and
yeah,
like any takers, any at all, because I
yeah,
just felt so terrible about myself.
yeah. You wanted instant support. You wanted,
Yeah, it's the
support that you
gratification,
were
the
yeah, that you
validation, and being told like, you're still desirable to somebody.
mhm,
And like,
mhm,
was that a healthy thing to do? Probably not. Was that like a safe thing to do considering my like medical circumstances?
right,
Definitely not.
right, right, correct.
To like have these like mediocre strangers crawling all over me, like for my own personal validation, it wasn't the best, and it was a really low point.
Right,
But it was the first time that it really hit me that things had really gone awry.
yes.
And that was shortly after I was told that my doctor told me, like, "We don't know what's going on. Like, we're having a really hard time with this, and we don't really know what the
Mhm.
outcome is gonna be, and it's not looking good." And
Right.
so it was
Ugh,
kind of this compounding of things that kind of
yes,
like I used sex as a personal validation for myself to
yeah,
feel better.
yes.
Now the drugs component, I mean, quasi self-explanatory because you're being pumped full of them on the daily.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, like, up until that point, I had never tried like pot or marijuana in any form at all. And
Right,
there's a really great story in the book where I have my friends come over to shave my head for fun, and we have like drinks and people are bringing food, and like we just had like this potluck dinner thing in my old apartment, and
right.
it was really, really fun. And a friend of mine brought these homemade pot brownies, and I'd never had them before. And like she told me that she was bringing them. I was like, no, don't, like, it's whatever. But she did anyway, because she's a good friend. And it didn't listen to me. And because I had never had them, I didn't really know what the situation was. So I had one, and then I had a second
Mhm,
one, and then I had a third
mhm.
one, plus alcohol. And by the time everyone left, I went to bed and I could not walk. I woke up because I had to go to the bathroom. I could not walk. I had to like
Gosh.
army crawl to the toilet. It was really tragic. It's one of those things where like in the moment it was like, oh no. And now looking back, I can laugh at it and it's fine.
Now I can see where you can laugh at that. That is very funny, and it's been more than one person that's gotten tripped up from marijuana brownies. It's not just
They'll get
you.
you, man. And this was before. I mean, this is 2011, 12.
Yeah,
And this
before
is
all the
before, well,
legal
the legalities of it, but also like before people were like, oh, like 10 milligrams and like this many whatevers. And like people know dosages now. Back then it was like, let's throw some buds in some butter and boil it and see what happens. Like, best of luck to you. Trial and error.
good luck.
Yeah, have fun.
Oh
Don't know
my
what's in it really, but here's the brownies.
God. Well, now, Edward, now you just mentioned that, you said that the doctors were taking a look at you and it wasn't looking good. So how do we go from wasn't looking good to being the sole survivor of this rare cancer?
What a great way to phrase that. I've never really thought about it that way. It was a weird turn of events, right? So like
Mhm.
I knew that they knew that things weren't going well because I asked them to be straight with me, and
Yes.
my doctor was, and that's what she told me. And
Mhm.
so when it got to the point where they were trying to stick to a protocol, it was right after radiation, and my radiation worked. Like I had like all of the chemos that I had up until then would shrink the tumor down, and then it would grow back, and it would
Right.
shrink down and grow back. And that happened every time I had chemo. And I was getting spinal taps full of chemo that they'd like shove like chemo into my spinal column. And
Yeah.
it was wild.
Yeah.
And so when we got to that point where you know, there was a turnaround when I started to feel better.
Hmm.
Radiation was really localized. It wasn't full body. So like
Okay.
my hair grew back and I started to eat better, and
Oh,
you know, like
good.
there were a lot of really great things that happened because of radiation. And like I'm sure some people listening might have heard the term chemo brain, where like
Mm.
you're just like living in a fog. You know,
Okay,
like you're
okay.
functioning and your motor skills are there and you're articulate, but like I don't know. I don't know what's
Right,
going on. Your cognitive
right.
still skills kind of go away a little bit and you're just
Yes.
less of a person.
Yeah.
And you know, during radiation that started to clear up. And so I started to think more clearly. And when they were telling me all these things that they wanted to do with a stem cell transplant, they wanted me to have an analogous stem cell transplant, which is when someone else is your donor.
Okay.
And I like didn't really want to do it the way that they described it to me. I was like, nah, that doesn't sound like something I want to do.
Mhm.
And you know, so I kind of put my foot down and was like, I don't want to do this. And they're like, well, you have to. I was like, I don't. You
Right,
know, I was
right,
like, I'm 24,
right.
or it was 25, I guess, at that point. I was like, I'm 25. I was in the best shape of my life when I got in here. There's no reason why I can't be my own donor.
Right.
And they were
Gotcha.
and they were so resistant to that. But I was like, no, this is what we're doing. I was like, I
Mm,
like you can look for another match if you want to, but I don't want to do that. And I'm verbalizing that to you now.
right,
And
right.
so we tried collecting stem cells from me and it wasn't successful. We only got a fraction of what we needed. And and the tumor was still shrinking even after we stopped radiation. And so I was just like, I don't see the need for this. Like, I'm not a doctor,
Right.
whatever, but like it felt like they were pushing me and pushing me and pushing me to this thing without it, just something about it felt off.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so I got to a point where they were so forceful about it that it felt like they needed it more than I needed it. And it just was
Yeah,
like it was like this one appointment where I was like, hang on a minute. Like, hello, I'm the patient. This is about me, not about
right,
you and what the
exactly.
hospital wants. And
Right.
so like I looked into it a little bit and I had a conversation with my mom and I was like, I don't think I want to be in this hospital anymore. I was like, I want to go get a second opinion, which we were told not to do. We were going,
What?
listen, honey, like this was a whole thing.
Oh,
And the reason I don't name this hospital in my book or in any interviews I do is because I don't need them to come after me and sue me. But they
no.
like, because I know someone on their legal team and they will and they'll win.
Right,
Um,
right.
so like he
Oh
knows
my
I'm going around running my mouth, but like,
god.
so like they just you know, they didn't I think they viewed me as a dead person. And so they were experimenting to see what they could do because it was a rare cancer.
That's what I
And
was
when
thinking.
I said something about going for a second opinion at Sloan Kettering specifically, they were like, "Oh, you don't want to go there." They're like, "They're a oiled machine. They'll treat you like a number." They're like,
Oh,
there's they'll like the care, the quality of care is broken down because of that." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I just went with it. And then once I got to the point where I had this chemo brain clarity, whatever,
mhm.
I was like, "No, I want to go to Sloan Kettering. Give me their number, refer me." And
Yeah.
when I got to Sloan Kettering, first of all, it's a circus to get any of your file from anything. They charge you for photocopies. And I was like, cool. So that's my body in there. You're gonna give it to me now.
Yeah, really. Come on now.
And you have to get your slides and all the other things. So by the time all of that happened, and I went to Sloan Kettering and sat down with my future doctor, she
Mhm.
literally took the slide out and like held it up to the light and was like, "That's not the kind of cancer you have." Like without anything. And I just sat there like with my jaw open, like, what? She's like, the protocol's pretty much the same, but they misdiagnosed you. And I was like, okay. And then my favorite part of this is when she asked me who my doctor was. I told her, and she was like, shame on her. I trained her. She should know better. And I was like, bitch, I am staying with you.
Wow.
It was wild.
Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah. And so when she gave me the rundown, she was like, yeah, you can totally be your own donor for a stem cell transplant, but you have to do it. And I was like, what if I don't want to do it? She's like, well, you won't live past 30. And
So you
I was
said,
like, okay, well, thank you for your honesty, and let's get that on the books.
"Let's go."
I'm available today.
Exactly. Wow. My
Yeah,
gosh.
she was great.
Definitely.
I was afraid of her the whole time. I loved her and I thought she was fabulous, but I was terrified of her.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
well,
when I got to the 5-year mark, and I didn't know this was true because I had to go see her, I think, once or twice a year for the first 5 years. And once
mhm.
you hit 5 years without a reoccurrence, you don't have to see your oncologist anymore. And
Okay.
I didn't know that, and I didn't know that that was the appointment I was walking into.
Oh,
And so when I got there, she's like, "You're 5 years." And I was like, "Yeah, weird, right?" And she handed me this little pin that was like a congratulations pin that she pinned on me. And she's like, "This is your last appointment with me." And I was like, "What? What
oh
are you
my
talking
god.
what last appointment?" And I cried in the room. I was just like
I can
I
see
was so
that.
sad. Like she saved my life, first of all.
Yes. Yes, because I was like, "Oh, wow." This is so yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
I just sat there
gosh.
and like cried and just looked at her and I was like, "Are you serious?" And I got so emotional. It caught me off guard because I was like, "Why are you crying? This is a good thing."
Yes, but still,
Yeah.
oh, wow. Wow, Edward. I mean, and to say this, as horrible as cancer is, as terrible as your diagnosis was and prognosis at one point was, I mean, this is an incredible story. It's an incredible, wonderful, beautiful story, you
It
know?
was weird to live through, and, like, another point that I try to drive home is stand up for yourself, like, it's so hard to
Yes.
do, it's so hard to do, and I'm not saying that it's easy by any stretch, like, it took me 4 rounds of failed chemo, radiation, and then some, like, pushing towards a thing I didn't wanna do for me to actually say, "No, I don't wanna do that." And
Right.
I had to be really forceful with them because they kept coming back with case studies and this, that, and the next thing, and for whatever reason, my brain and my body were just like, "Don't do it." And
Well, go
it was
ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was
Your
just gonna
brain and
say
your body.
yeah, and I was just gonna say, like, beyond that, like, it just took an appointment where I was like I just had to look her dead in the face and say, "I'm not doing this, and
Right.
I want a second opinion. May I please have my file?" And I
Right.
really just did have to, like, dig my heels in because otherwise they again, like, I think they just saw me as, like, a dead person that they could, like, toy around with and run experiments on, which is what they were
Yes.
doing.
Yes, that's exactly what they were doing, and probably hoping to write some type of award-winning, medical journal article,
That
uh,
part.
based on you. You just don't ever know. So, that's one of the takeaways, I say, the greatest one of the greatest takeaways from your story is that you have to fight for your rights. And a lot of people, so many people are afraid of the doctor, because the doctor is supposed to be so smart and they don't want to offend the doctor. And I think doctor in the American society has taken on kind of like what the priest took on in Catholic society. And it's just like, well, if the priest said or whatever the doctor said, you were very, very deathly ill, but you stood up for your rights. And so that is definitely one of the things that people should get from this interview. The second thing is that somewhere in there, because of your support and probably because of who you are, you felt bad. You needed validation at different points, but there has to be a positivity there. There has to be a drive there. There's still a drive to live, to win, to succeed, and that's what you had in you. You had to have had that in you to even be able to fight for your medical rights, so
Yeah, well, and one thing I always kind of jokingly say is, what do you call a med student that's about to graduate that has all Ds? A
well,
doctor. Still graduated.
still
Still a
graduated.
doctor. Got straight Ds, but are still a doctor.
Sure.
And we have to remember that not all doctors are created equal. There is no
No,
like across the board standard. I mean, there's a standard, but like
right,
there's variation on that standard. And so I'm not saying don't trust your doctor. What I'm saying is if it doesn't feel right, get a second opinion. Seek
right.
out secondary opinions because like that one doctor is one of however many nearby. And this is also a whole different problem with the American medical system and how like there's out of network and insurance and blah 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 blah.
Yes.
But like, again, like things I try to drive the point home to is go to a specialist. That was my biggest mistake. I went to a big conglomerate hospital that had a cancer wing
Mhm.
instead of a cancer hospital where the entire multi-billion-dollar structure
Mhm.
only does cancer all day, every day.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so,
Okay.
again, in the not all doctors are created equal, going to the top first will always save you a headache.
Mhm.
And
Exactly.
it especially with something like cancer, like, don't screw around.
Right.
Like,
Right, right,
it's just not something to be, like, tiptoed with, and to
right.
your point of, like, wanting to live and wanting to do the things, like, you have to fight. It's like the idea of, like, sitting around manifesting that you wanna have $1,000,000. Well, it's not just gonna fall out of the sky. You have to, like, go do something to get it, and so,
Correct.
like,
Correct.
in a traumatic experience like this, it's like, "Oh my god, I just wanna live. I just wanna, like, get through this." It's like, "Okay, well, these are the things that you have to do to make that happen."
Yes.
Laying around all day staring at the ceiling feeling sorry for yourself is not it.
It's not
And
it.
there's room for that. I certainly
Yeah.
did it. I'm
Yes.
not immune to having done that and
Right.
drank my way through chemo because of it.
Right. And the
To
brownies.
and the brownies. Yep, they lasted a while. Um, but, like, you have to be active you have to participate in your own life, and I think that's
Yes.
true in general, but especially in a
Yes.
circumstance like this.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You have to participate in your own life because just so many people do not. They're just here and they're just kind of gliding through.
Yep.
They go to work, they come home, and that's about it. And they're not really participating. So all of that and
Yeah.
above is true.
And
Now, how did
there's
you?
nothing wrong with that either, like,
No,
there's certainly a place to, like, glide through life if you're comfortable and happy, great.
right.
But I just get so frustrated when I see people who are just, like, who have all this beautiful, gorgeous potential, and they don't want anything. Like, want something. What do you want? Like, this
Right.
cannot be it.
Right, exactly, 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 100%. Well, now how did you, know that you wanted to write a book?
I didn't. I knew that I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what it was. And so, there's for the
Yeah.
purposes of remaining family friendly, um,
Okay.
I was back on the dating apps again. Several years after I had been cancer free, and I happened to meet this very handsome man who was coming to my apartment from where the neighborhood, like the block where my hospital was.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, huh, interesting.
Hmm.
And so he came over and we got to know each other. And
Yes.
and then after we were done getting to know each other, I kind of called him on it. And I was like, so what were you doing over at Sloan Kettering? And he, like, kind of freaked out. And I was like, hey, 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 hey. Like, like, I was a patient there. I still am,
Yeah.
so we had to talk about it. And he kind of
Yeah.
opened up to me about how, now that he was cancer free, he
Oh.
was irritated by everything and he didn't know how to maneuver, and, like, work felt awful, and, like, there were just so many shifts that were like, what in the world
Mhm.
is my life, and what does
Mhm.
it all mean? What am I doing here? And, like,
Mhm.
and I was like, I have felt that way for the last 3 years, and no
Oh
one
my
told me that
gosh.
that was normal.
Oh
And
my.
so we had this really long chat about it. We stayed in touch, and I had contacted a couple of my other friends who had had smaller versions of cancer, but cancer nonetheless, and
Mhm.
asked them similar questions. I was like, "Hey, when you were told that you were cancer free, how did you feel?" And we had this really long each of us had this really long chat about how, like, feel, I don't know, nothing. Like, what do I do? It was this conversation of being lost,
Mhm.
and this kind of, like, existential identity crisis.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
that's exactly how I'd been living the prior 3 years of my life, and so at that point, I was like, "I have to write, this is what this is." I was like, "This is what I wanna do. I wanna write a book about this, and I wanna talk about how going through the cancer experience is insane, and then living through it and coming out on the other side of it is almost more insane." And
Wow.
so Yeah, and so to your point that you were making about how musical theater and cancer don't necessarily belong together,
Mhm.
that's where they belong together, because musical theater is so heightened and insane, and everything is like on a bigger, louder, in your face kind of scale, and everything that happens to you during cancer is the same, because
Yeah,
it's
oh,
all out of this world. Like, I'm getting chemotherapy injected into my spine. What?
yeah,
Like
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
like, you're
crazy.
gonna pump me full of drugs until I have no immune system left, and then you're gonna pump me full of my own fluids to bring my
Yeah,
immune system back, and
right.
maybe it'll work. Like, what is
Yes.
happening?
Yes, yes,
And so the
exactly.
choice to use musical theater as a frame for the actual process of being a patient, and then also surviving when you're just kind of like in this desert of like, well, I mean, who am I right now?
Yeah,
Because I don't know. And it's been
yeah.
taken all away, and I have to figure this out again. And
Oh,
so that's why I decided to use it, because I thought it was such a great kind of window into this heightened reality that you experience as a patient and survivor that doesn't
mhm.
necessarily exist in the regular kind of like hyperbole that we speak in on a regular day-to-day basis in the English language. Like, musical theater is a totally separate language
Right, right.
that is much more colorful and contrasty and saturated in color, and add something to an experience like cancer or anything that just makes it so much more like, this is crazy.
Right, exactly, exactly. Well, I am so glad that you told us, myself and the listeners, about, when you hear about somebody's cancer free, you're like, yay, hooray, and we're clapping and we're turning cartwheels. And I did not realize that cancer patients or anybody that survives anything such as that um, has that thought, that feeling. I never
Yeah.
realized that.
Well, and I'm glad you said it in that exact way, because a lot of times when I have these interviews, or I go to talks and whatnot, I have to say that, where it's like, you're told you're cancer free, and all of a sudden everyone's like, woohoo, you get to live, and then they all
Yeah.
disperse, and you're like, right, but what do I do now?
Right, exactly, because your life has profoundly changed. It is
Changed.
profoundly changed,
It's
and
and
so
not to like negate what those who like go off and serve in the military and serve country and whatever
right,
go through, but it is seeing combat in a way, in the sense that you're seeing the combat of your body's falling apart. There's parts of your body that are dying. You're being pumped full of drugs. Like, everything around you is changing. Your brain chemistry is changing. And it is sort of like having, well, not sort of, it is having a PTSD after the fact.
yes,
I
yes.
went months thinking that any little scrape, any little cut, any little bruise was cancer coming back. And like,
Oh,
I was
yeah,
like compulsively checking lymph nodes to make sure that I was
yes,
okay. And
yes,
any little, and I would like feel a rib and be like, oh my God, maybe it's a tumor. It's like, it's
uh,
your rib, dude. Like, chill
r
out. Like, it's,
right.
okay, calm down.
I'm
But
sorry,
like, but it's true. You go through this
it's
like in
true.
you go through this ridiculous like, oh my God, I have a hangnail, it's cancer. Like,
Uh,
it's just like, doesn't make sense. There's no logic to it at all. But like, that's what your brain does, because it's
yeah.
this traumatic like PTSD of like, every little thing can trigger you back into the hospital. Like, smelling certain hand sanitizers is like right back in that room.
Oh,
Like going through COVID with wearing masks and gloves and
oh,
everything. I had to do that in quarantine. Everyone around me had to do that while I was in quarantine
yes,
during my stem cell transplant. That
right,
brought me back to that. And
right.
so it really is just like this crazy, yes, you get to live, and that's great. And that's the yay, let's celebrate with champagne and cake, which I did.
Mm,
Um,
right,
but then there's the part after that. It's very much like the fairy tale happily ever after. Well, what happened after that?
right.
Like, there's a really great Sarah Bareilles song called Fairy Tale, where she kind of like details what happens to all of them after the happily ever after situation.
Yes, yes,
And
yes,
it's very much that, like, I beat cancer happily ever after, and then I
yes.
had an existential crisis and everything came crashing down. I had to figure out what the rest of my life was going to look like.
Right, right, and nobody is in tune to that, so, wow, I'm so glad you said that and told us that. I'm so glad that you let us know that, and then this will help all of us be better friends too.
That kind of also another reason why I wrote the book, not to give the two that kind of ghosted me during that period of time, too much, brain space or airtime. But like, that
Right.
was one of the reasons, because like, if you're not equipped to deal with this kind of thing, here's the playbook on what happens in the worst case scenario. So if you can read this and laugh and get through it and understand it, if something like this happens to someone in your life that's not that severe and crazy, you'll be great.
Right. Yes. 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 Edward, I'm so full from this interview, and I knew it was going to be an in-depth interview. I knew what I wanted to ask and to get out of this interview, and for the audience to get out of this interview, and I think we achieved that. And I just thank you for chronicling your journey, and you did let us in on a lot of insights that people don't even realize or know about, and I just say thank you. Just thank you for writing this book.
Well, thank you. I was happy to do it. It was it was a labor, maybe not of love, but it was a labor.
Good, good.
And I am very proud of it, and there's a lot of really cool things coming up centered around it that I'm excited about. And so
Oh, yes, yes, you were telling me, but we can't say
we
anything.
can't say anything just yet.
Okay, well, I
Although
will
wait,
say
I don't remember
we
how long ago we spoke, but the Insider article did come out, so that is out.
oh, okay, so,
So that
okay,
we
so
can
let's
talk about.
okay, so let's talk about it then. Let's
Okay.
tell the insider article you it said okay, so tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Insider article is, my publicist submitted a pitch of this story about my like friend and ex-boyfriend leaving me during this period of time and how that kind of happened.
Mhm.
And the story of that, and it was basically just the tie-in to how when I was going into this situation, I had, like I said, so much career momentum that felt so good. And I felt like, oh my
Mhm.
God, everything is working. Things are happening the way that I want them to. And I have such a bright future. And then this happened.
Yeah.
And like I said, like your whole life gets derailed and you have this existential like crisis of like, who am I?
Right, right.
And so it has taken me, like, I hate to say it, but until really last year and this year to be
Mhm.
like, to get back to that place where it's like, oh my God, it's working. It's actually working. And like, I
Right.
feel like I have that momentum again. And,
Yes.
unfortunately, that is 10 plus years in the making. But,
Right,
when I said that cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me, like, this is part of it. Because
right,
without it, I would have never written this book. I would have never been able to talk to like you or other lovely people that I've
right.
also spoken to, and
Yes.
the other opportunities that have come and are coming along the way for this book would never have happened.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what my life would look like had cancer not popped its head in.
It's
You know,
strange, isn't it?
it's
It's
so weird.
strange.
Like, would I
Yeah.
even like the person I am? Where would I be? What would be happening? Like, so many things happened because of cancer for the good, for the
Yes.
betterment of me.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
such a weird feeling. And so that's kind of the article overarches into that kind of theme where it's like all of this crazy stuff happened and like these people
Yes.
were not equipped to support me. And even though I had
Yes.
support elsewhere, it really
Yes.
that hurt because they felt the closest aside of my parents. And so, it's then navigating out of that and getting to a place where you can be like, okay, wait a minute, like what I'm doing now is sticking, it's working, like there's something
Right.
happening. And so like that was kind of like the general thing of that article, and I'm super proud of it. It feels really good to have my name up there right under the insider heading, and
Yes.
more of that, please.
Yes, I know that's right. And I was thinking about what you were just saying, and you said it a little bit. There's a Bible verse, and I know a lot of people might not know this, but all things work together for the good. And then when I when I have been in church, my younger self heard that verse, I'm like, you mean to tell me I've got to have a whole bunch of bad stuff happen plus some good stuff? I mean, you don't really realize that verse until you kind of live it. And my situations have not been as deep as your medical diagnosis, but there's been things in my life that was like, oh gosh, I had to go through this and this, which was like stepping on hot coals in order to get to this.
Yeah, well, and it's kind
What?
of like it really is kind of like that adage of seeing the forest for the trees, and, like, when you're in it, all you see are these big trees that are like, "Oh god," like, "Ugh." But when you give yourself a second to pull yourself away from it and see how all of those big trees, good or bad, have made this big, beautiful forest,
Right,
then it's not so bad. And I'm not so much a religious church-going kinda
right,
gal, but, like,
right.
I will point to what I know best, which is
Yes.
Stephen Sondheim and musical theater.
Yes.
And if you know Into the Woods, which is one of my favorites,
Okay,
there's a line in a song in Act 2 called "Moments in the Woods," and it
okay.
says, "If life were made of moments, even now and then a bad one. If life were made of moments, then we'd never know we had one."
Oh,
And so
right.
it is like the good and the bad and the space between, and,
Yeah.
like mundane things you do every day, like brushing your teeth and making coffee and going for a walk, or just kind of like the things in between. So if every single thing was a moment, then that would just become normalized and there would be no moments. And so
Right.
the idea of having these like moments of whether they be good or bad
Right.
really kind of gives you that dynamic of life where, like, yes, you do have to go through the bad things to have the good things, and
Yep.
in the end you have this array of moments that make up life.
Yes. 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 Oh, so beautiful. What a beautiful takeaway. And we will end right here with that beautiful word. Edward, thank you so much for joining the Bookaholic podcast. If
Thank you for
nobody got
having me,
anything out
seriously.
of it, it was me.
Well, I'm glad if it's just you that it was just you.
Well, Edward, we'll have all of your information in the podcast show notes and in the video description box below the video on YouTube. Edward, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.